A lot of this isn't going to make sense to you, and I'm sorry about that. I'm just going to start at the beginning, with the house.
What Remains of Edith Finch is one of my favorite entertainment experiences of all time. It's one of those stories that will stay with me forever, and I think everyone should experience this phenomenal work of art.
As a child, the house made me uncomfortable in a way I couldn't put into words. Now, as a 17-year-old, I knew exactly what those words were. I was afraid of the house.
This gem of a media product is so phenomenally well produced and so heartbreaking at times that it doesn't do it justice to call it anything else but an interactive masterpiece.
Nothing in the house looked abnormal. There was just too much of it, like a smile with too many teeth.
What Remains of Edith Finch was a journey that transported me into its fable-like world and kept me there until the very last second. It's one of those games that made me consider myself lucky for having the opportunity to be privy to its unique storytelling. I love it so much that I think if there ever will be a video game museum, I wholeheartedly think that What Remains of Edith Finch should be among the collection. Mainly, it's composed of a compendium of stories connected together by a singular narrative motif: the history of the Finch family and how they all but one met their inevitable demise. Some living more than others, while some perishing so young, it's simply heartbreaking just to think about it. The adventure starts off as a story told by the protagonist, Edith, and this goes on throughout the entire game. The developers took the idea of storytelling through gameplay and shaped it to a level of sentimental perfection. Because as you make your way through the game, your progress is never halted by cutscenes, and everything is blended together in a perfect harmony of gameplay and storytelling. And we see this happening through her verbalized recollections that are literally part of the surrounding environment. The purpose behind it is total immersion without interruption, and in my opinion, the end goal was more than met.
Just like I had no idea where all this was gonna lead.
Going in, I had no idea what to expect, but in no shape or form was I prepared to start off with Molly's story.
December 13th, 1947. Dear Diary, I'll be gone soon, but I wanted to tell somebody about what's gonna happen. It started when Mom sent me to bed without dinner.
The sweet little girl that didn't get to live past the age of 10. And it begins simply enough by playing as Molly and you're wandering about in her room.
Then I heard chirping outside my window. It was a barn swallow going back to her nest.
But then this happens.
I reached out for her. And suddenly, I was a cat.
The element of surprise from that completely sucker punched me.
I gobbled her up. And suddenly, I was an owl.
And with every subsequent transformation, I was so seduced by the story, I felt like I was floating away unwillingly to wherever the narrative wanted to take me.
And suddenly, I was a shark.
Now, in a game where you encounter a lot of short stories such as this one, repetition tends to be one of the quote-unquote main villains a player could face. Cause if every story that follows has the same structure as the one before it, you might get bored after the first 2 or 3. But here, the case is completely the opposite. And thus, this is another feature I love about the game because the developers knew this going in when they were trying to relay a new entry in the family history. Like Barbara's story, for example, where it all happens inside an interactive comic book depicting her final moments. The tone of her demise is straight out of a 1980s horror movie, but it does even more than that. It actually pays homage to the Michael Myers Halloween series by basically using its soundtrack. Still on her story, another cool reference is from I Know What You Did Last Summer with the killer having a hook for a hand. The multitude of references from Barbara's story are such a delight to behold, and for me, the best one is the way in which it is told by a narrator.
All they ever found of her ear. Now that's what I call a real eerie tale.
Whose likeness you might remember from this TV series.
Tales from the Crypt Keeper.
The way in which her story is conveyed to us proves that What Remains of Edith Finch keeps surprising us and never lets a dull moment through, because that would ruin the immersion and pull us out of its masterfully crafted narrative grasp.
And with her final breath, Barbara Finch gave the performance of her life.
Moving on to Walter's story, Barbara's kid brother that probably actually saw what happened to her was apparently scarred for life and hid for 30 years in the house basement. His story, although short, is an allegory for those that are prisoners to their set-in-stone ways and never go out of their comfort zone. If there's one thing we can all learn from Walter's story, is that we have to appreciate life in the now, because the inevitable will meet us all in the end.
Whatever's out there, I want you to know I'm ready for it. I'm going to appreciate all of it, especially the food. I don't mind if I only have a year left, or a month, or a single week. I'd be happy with one new day. I can already imagine the sun on my face.
But as sentimental as these aforementioned stories were for me, none of them had a greater impact than the one with baby Gregory.
Dear Kay, do you remember the way Gregory used to laugh when he thought he was alone? Like something funny was happening, but only he could see it. I think he saw things the rest of us don't.
As a player, up until that point in the game, you already know that every family member so far has died regardless of age. But when you get to play as a 1-year-old toddler and know from the start that he will soon perish as well, you know it's not going to be something you'd enjoy. So you clench your teeth and go on, only to be filled with this sense of wonder and sadness concurrently, bittersweet as they call it, while seeing a magical world through the eyes of an innocent baby. Gregory's moment is so well sketched that even though I only played as him for a few actual minutes, the experience will stay with me for the rest of my life. And I can assure you I'm not exaggerating in the slightest. It was this impactful for me, even during my second playthrough.
I'm sure he's happy. And he'd want me to be happy too. Good luck, Kay. Love, Sam.
That being said, one other story managed to put its mark on me, and I would rate it at the same level of emotion, but unlike Gregory's story, in this one I felt a rational involvement as well. Of course, I'm talking about Lewis. The entire genius behind his story lies within the execution of gameplay. While you play as Lewis working at the cannery, you see his character being described through the narration of the letter written by his psychologist.
He knew it was all in his head, but he took it very seriously.
And as she is telling the tale of the alternate reality he fictionalized, you actually get to see this new world manifest, intertwined with the reality he was suffering in. This was so amazing to me because of the duality of the scene. As you progress, so does his fake world evolve, and you realize you are actually playing 2 games at once. Well, 3 if you want to go all meta. For me, this is storytelling through gameplay at its finest. And just as a quick side note, I'd like to say that there are a lot of AAA games out there that cannot manage this level of relaying a story through gameplay alone. But the true stroke of genius here lies within a certain phenomenon that is occurring more under the radar, and you can certainly feel it, but at the same time, you may not be aware of it consciously, because you're too busy hacking away at fish all the while sailing past Lewistopia. I'm talking about the fact that you start sympathizing with Lewis by simply doing the same tasks he does, and thus you start identifying with him, ultimately understanding him. Especially towards the end when you hear this.
For someone who'd never known success in the real world, I think it was overwhelming. And then it struck him that the real Lewis was not the one chopping salmon, but the one climbing the steps of a golden palace.
Or even a couple of seconds later when she quotes him saying that,
"My imagination is as real as my body," he told me. It was hard to argue with him.
by this point in the storyline, if you're agreeing with his altered view of the world, then you, the player, have left the realm of sympathy and stepped into the realm of empathy. Something that is really hard to achieve as a storyteller. That's what makes Lewis's story such a fantastic work of art, even on its own.
And the rest I think you know. Mrs. Finch, your son was a kind man who will be missed by all of us who knew him.
Lastly, we have the story of our protagonist, Edith. Now, it's no surprise that she meets her inevitable end as well, but that moment isn't cheapened by the foreshadowing present throughout the entire game. Her last seconds on screen were still very emotional for me, mainly because of what she was saying through the journal we first saw in the game to her yet unborn child.
This is where your story begins. I'm sorry I won't be there to see it. It's a lot to ask, but I don't want you to be sad that I'm gone. I want you to be amazed that any of us ever had a chance to be here at all. Good luck.
And I don't even want to know the continuation of his story. From start to finish, there is nothing but emotion in the game, and if you listen carefully enough, you'll realize that the entire premise behind the story is about how to view life. It is fragile, it is fleeting, it is fickle, but that doesn't mean you can't try to enjoy it, such as you can in the wait for the inevitable.